This is Content Connect, a podcast about how your content can help you gain more qualified leads and nurture prospects through your sales funnel. Here's your host, Steve Wilson.
Hi there, everybody. This is Stephen Wilson. I'm joined today with Dave Goldberg from Digital Waterworks Productions, which, as you may know, is based in Plainview, New York. We're going to talk about podcasts today, and I've had some experience helping clients do podcasts, and Dave from the other side has had some experience helping clients doing podcasts. How are you doing today, Dave?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Battling a cold.
I was going to say, you sound like you're just getting over something.
Yeah, I'm on the final stages, I hope, so we'll see how it goes. But the one question I wanted to ask you, Dave, was I have found when I help people do podcasts, I usually ask them, I said, when you hear that people listen to your podcast, where do you find that people usually listen most often? In the car, in the gym?
Right.
And I have found it's really a lot of people say they listen to it while they're on the treadmill in the gym. And what type of experience have you found, Dave?
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you. I mean, I think personally, I listen to most of my podcasts in the car because my commute to work is roughly 30 minutes, and podcasts, for the most part, are usually under 30 minutes. So car for me. On the other hand, in terms of the general public, gym is, people who spend 30 minutes, I know I'm on the treadmill for 45 minutes, and I do listen to podcasts.
That's good. I'm impressed.
I don't run constant for 45 minutes, but it's a great time. You know, what are you doing otherwise? When you're watching the broken TV that's stuck on CNN, or might as well throw my earbuds in and get smart.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another thing, too, that I found with my clients is that when we first record a podcast, the first thing they ask me is, how do we measure the success of a podcast?
That's a popular question. You're not going to necessarily see a sales bump. I tell most of my clients the way to measure or to sort of gauge the success of a podcast is make it interactive. Put some interactive features in it. Put a call to action, make a trivia question, do a little direct response mechanism at the end, suggest topics for future podcasts. So you might say, at the end, hey, listen, we thank you for your time. We hope you learned something today on today's podcast. If you'd like to suggest a topic, please send it to this email address. If we use your topic, we're going to give you a free trip to Tahiti or something.
Tahiti has been nice this time of year. And, another thing, too, before we even get into, measuring this success, I mean, one of the things I spend time with a client discussing is how do we make a podcast interesting? How do we make it engaging that people will want to listen to, whether it's a 3, 4, or 15-minute podcast? And what I have found is that we got to make them really focused on one specific topic, because people are spending, their time, whether it's in the car or in the gym, and they feel they're going to learn something and they're going to put that time to good use, and they're going to listen to the podcast. So I try to make it really engaging, informative, as a regular piece of content. Do you feel there's any difference with the content for a podcast, Dave?
I would agree 100%. I think it has to be, or at least has to begin focused, and it has to end focused. It's a radio show, really. You're just not broadcasting over the airwaves.
That's a good point.
I think you can veer off the road a little bit, but you do have to get back to topic at some point. Otherwise, it's too disjointed.
Right.
Let's face it. There's a ton of content out there. I subscribe to a lot of podcasts, and I'll tell you, there are some that I subscribe to on a regular basis, and the content of that particular show isn't of interest to me, and I'll just skip over it. But doesn't mean I'm not coming back. I just don't, that doesn't interest me.
Well, Dave, I know you record a lot of podcasts here in the studio. I mean, have you found there to be any secret sauce that really helps make it for a better podcast?
Yeah, I think you need to be edgy. You have to push the envelope a little bit. Safe is boring. You need to go a little beyond your audience's comfort zone. You have to know your audience. That's actually something I was going to say before.
Definitely.
You can't, your podcast can't be everything for everybody.
Right.
And chances are, if your audience is your customer base or who you want your customer base to be, your prospects, you need to speak to that audience. But at the same time, push that envelope, make yourself the expert, sound like an expert, and come off being the authority on the topic that you're speaking about.
Right. That's exactly what, the type of conversations I have with my clients when we start creating content. The first thing I ask them is, who is your target audience? Because like you said, you can't be everything to everybody.
A lot of people don't know who their audience is.
Yes, that is a scary concept. I am amazed at the times when I do ask my clients or prospects who their target audience is. Sometimes they don't have a clear, definitive answer.
So, setting that up in advance is very important. You're going to go into a studio or you're going to record it yourself, and before you spend that time and invest the money, you have to have a good plan. It's like you're directing a motion picture. You have to have the script, the storyboard. You have to outline your topics, your talking points. In a sense, much like we did today. You and I had previously discussed that we were going to do a podcast on podcasting.
Yes, exactly.
And you developed some questions, I developed some content, some answers, and we're sort of going through that. We're not reading a script,
right?
But we are reading, we do have, for those of you listening, we do have a list of points that we're covering, but we are speaking freely and we're speaking from our own head and on the topic.
Yeah, here we are today. You have an incredible place here in Plainview and really quality, high standards and the like, but say somebody wanted to do it on their own, a podcast. Is it really a viable option for people to say, hey, I want to do a podcast, let me do it on my own and not go into a studio?
Yeah, absolutely.
How would you suggest they go about doing that?
Well, look, every computer made in the last 5 to 10 years has come with some sort of digital audio recording program.
Oh, I was not aware of that.
Yeah, not that everybody has a Mac, but I'm sure everybody's heard of GarageBand, for example. GarageBand is a program that comes with the Mac, and it allows you to record audio.
What happens to the people that have lowly Microsoft?
That's fine. There are tons of audio recording programs. Yeah, there's a free program called Audacity that you can download. It's a free program. It's been around for a long time. It's very stable. I know many colleagues, professional colleagues, and also clients that are using that program, and that's actually for Mac and PC.
So the Audacity, you would have like an icon on your desktop and you just click the Audacity icon? Is that how
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than that. But yes, it's an application. So it's got an icon, you launch it, and then it has multiple channels. You can record, 1 microphone, 2 microphones, 3 microphones.
Wow.
It gets a little more complicated than that. You might need, to hook up headphones. You might need to hook up more than 1 microphone and need a small mixer. But it certainly can be done, and the quality can be there if you pay attention. For example, sound treatment. You've been in recording studios and you see all the different things they have on the walls to absorb sound. If you don't have that and you're in a square office with sheetrock, there's going to be a bit of reverb. Or
I always know back in my agency days, we'd go into a sound room and it'd be like that.
The
foam with the little diamonds on it, whatever.
Exactly. That's all just sound treatment. That's there to absorb the audio reflections so that the sound doesn't bounce around the room, and we have that in this room as well. That's why it sounds like we're, it's a more intimate sound. It doesn't sound like we're in a big box.
Right.
But so those are considerations that you might have to take. But I have clients. We have many clients. I would say 65 to 70% of our clients who are recording podcasts come into the studio and record here, but we have the balance of them recording in their offices or even at home. I have a client for 10 years who for the first 9 years was coming into the studio. He's going to be moving out of state soon. And he said to me, what am I going to do? The podcast has to continue. So I suggested, I told him what microphone to buy. He already has a laptop, a little bit of additional gear. I think his investment was maybe less than $500.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I told him how to set up the room with some blankets. He's only doing the podcast once a month. So, set up some blankets to absorb the sound. You're not going to go start changing.
Now, would you suggest that you do like 4 podcasts in one day so that you take advantage of the whole setup?
Yeah. When we record podcasts for clients here in the studio, that's typically what we suggest. It's economics. They're here already. It's your time. It's our time. You're going to record, a 15-minute podcast. Then let's spend an hour or two, knock out 4 podcasts. You'll have a month, depending upon the frequency that you release them. If you release them weekly, you're going to have a month's worth of content. Some clients we squeeze in a 5th, so they're building a buffer, a catalog, and then they release them at will.
One question I get a lot when I suggest doing a podcast to clients is, well, where is it going to be hosted? I mean, how do people find the podcast?
Yeah, well, there are iTunes obviously is the big clearinghouse for podcast content, but they're not the only one. There's SoundCloud.
What I usually do is I just do it as a link and host it on their blog.
That's fine. Yeah, it depends. People aren't going to find that. That's good if you're doing. You have a constant contact list. Right. You have a database of people that you want to send this out to. Look, keep in mind, many people are using podcasts now to replace the old newsletter, which was mailed on paper.
Right.
They're also using
those?
Yeah, I do. They're also using it to replace constant contact. Mail that people get. And unfortunately, there are companies that are sending not too frequently, but too much content.
Yes.
You send out a newsletter, an electronic newsletter, and it's got 2,000 words. Nobody's got time to read that.
Yeah, that's always an ongoing issue that I have with my clients is, what is the right frequency for sending out content?
Yeah.
And what I suggest to them is that if they're worried about overdoing the amount of content, is to consider segmentation of their database.
Right.
And this way we create different type of content for different types of audiences.
Right. I was going to say also thin down the content and then just create links for more information. If you read the 5-6 sentences and if you bit the hook and you want more information, just let us know and we'll send you that article in its unabridged form.
Yeah. I mean, what I have found too is that different clients have different objectives with their podcasts. Mm-hmm. Some just want to entice them and get their name and address with some type of call to action. Others try to use the podcast to educate and nurture their prospects through the sales funnel. So everybody has a different opinion as to how and why to use a podcast versus, straight text.
Right. Now, I'm not from the readers. It's partly because time limitations, partly because of just so much content coming into my email client that I get overwhelmed and I just don't have time. So I typically, I'll get a news feed and there'll be an interesting article. I'll start to read it. The phone rings. I get this. But again, you go back to the treadmill now.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Right. Exactly.
Treadmill, for me, treadmill and car. Mm-hmm. Two places where I'm typically not disturbed. Of course, the phone can ring in the car, but fortunate for me, I don't get too many phone calls between the hours that I'm driving, on my way to work or on my way home. During the day is another story. But I wouldn't have time to read or listen to a podcast during the day anyway.
Right.
I also listen to podcasts at night. My wife watches TV, and I sometimes I plug my headphones into my computer, and I'll listen to my laptop, and I'll listen to a podcast. Now, this doesn't go on all night, and I'm not listening till 3 o'clock in the morning. But sometimes somebody will send me an email with a link to a podcast or recording. And I'll check it out later. And I'm just going through deleting email. Let me listen to this.
Right.
And 15 minutes, I heard what I needed to hear. I didn't really have to read and concentrate. Reading at night puts me to sleep.
Right. I mean, you raise a good point though about the length of a podcast. That's another consideration I always discuss with clients is, is there a proper length of a podcast?
We're about there now.
Okay.
15 to 30 minutes. If it's really critical information and it needs to not be broken up into two topics, then you can push it to 30.
Right.
The majority of our podcasts are in the 15-minute range.
Right. It sounds like a good,
a good way to wrap up.
A good way to wrap up, definitely. Well, Dave, thanks a lot for having us here at Digital Waterworks, and look forward to our next production.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.